of alleles. So this came up in a recent vocab word where they used to call it relative frequencies. Now they're calling it allele frequencies in the book, if that rings a bell. And this is something interesting. So it's looking at the number of times. That's the relative part. Comparing how many number of times. That's like in relation to other alleles. Okay, that's the compared part here. So relative is kind of going with the compared. So the number of times that an allele of a gene occurs in a gene pool compared to the other alleles of the gene. So I got it kind of mixed up there for a second, but the number of times, that goes with frequency. So frequency is the number of times. Relative is the comparison, and then it's focusing on alleles. So let's look at that again. So it's the number of times that an allele of a gene occurs in a gene pool compared to the other alleles of the gene. And what this does is it allows us to possibly predict the evolutionary pathway of the population. So for instance, if we took this population of mice, so just to make the numbers easy, let's imagine there's 100 mice. Okay, and so the percentages are literally equal to the total. So 48% or 48 mice would be heterozygous and have a black color, because in this case black is the dominant color. 16% are homozygous, so they have two black alleles, so obviously they're black. And then 36% of the mice are homozygous for brown, because they only have two brown alleles. So black being the dominant. Now, if we counted the mice, we would see that 64 out of 100 are black. So we'd probably be like, yeah, this species is evolving black. Black is the good camouflage. Probably more will be black over time. But if we look at the relative frequency of their alleles, we get different data. So in this case, these two are equal, right? All 48 of these mice have one of each. So if we cancel this out and just focus on these two, we see there's actually a big percentage of brown by comparison. So again, these mice have one of each, so they cancel 36 to 16. That's a big difference. So there's way more brown alleles in this population. So by analyzing the relative frequency of their alleles, we could actually predict that this species over time is evolving brown, and perhaps black was the better camouflage in the past, but it's actually maybe shifting at this time. And there's a little bit of a math problem we can do. Normally in the normal school year we would do this, but not sure we're going to do it this year, but a little bit of a math scenario to figure it out. So in the case of like these little frogs, let's say, it's kind of cool little frogs, we've got capital G for green being the dominant color over lowercase g being brown. And here would be, let's say, our gene pool. So in this case, just using really easy numbers, let's say we have 10 frogs. So 4 of them are homozygous dominant and all green. 4 are heterozygous and are still green but are hiding the brown allele. And then 2 frogs are homozygous recessive and have only recessive brown alleles. So first thing we have to do to solve this is we would figure out the total number of alleles. So it's easy, you just double the population. So there's 10 frogs, 4, 4, and 2. They all have 2 alleles for color. So 4, 4, and 2 is 10 times 2 alleles for color equals 20. And now we will figure out the frequency. And so for the frequency for the dominant green, the way we would solve this is distributing the number in front into all the capital G's. So this is 4 plus another 4 plus another 4. Okay, so that would be 12. And 12 out of 20 is 60%. And then that means it's got to come out of 100. So that means there's got to be 8 out of 20 are brown alleles, which would be 40%. And actually we can see that here. So if we distribute the 4 into the lowercase g, that's 4 plus 2 would be 8. 8 out of 20 is 40%. So there are more green frogs than brown. So this frequency makes sense. But if we counted them, 8 out of 10 are green. And it's a much higher percentage. When we actually look at their frequency, it's actually only 60% of the alleles are green. So maybe they're shifting towards brown. There's not enough evidence yet, but it's getting pretty close. So 80% look brown, but in their alleles 80% look green, but in their alleles 60% are green. So it's getting pretty close to 50-50. And maybe actually, possibly, they're evolving towards a brown color. All right, then the last topic is genetic drift. And this is the random change in allele frequencies that occur in small populations due to chance events. Like in this case, we have like a flood or a big forest fire. And so this is going to really change the frequencies because let's say back to our frogs, we've got 80% are green and 20% are brown, or in this case, 60% green alleles. And if a flood comes through and kills all the green ones, now the gene pool is 100% brown. So this flukish event could really shift the frequencies. Or let's say the forest fire did the same thing. And let's say it only killed the brown ones. Now they're 100% green. So these random events in genetic drift could, drastically alter the allele frequencies in the gene pool and cause, the evolutionary path to change. And that's because the remaining organisms will determine the new gene pool and the evolutionary path that this species is on. All right, and there's two types. So the first one we're going to go over is called the bottleneck effect. So this is an extreme reduction in the alleles of a gene pool due to some kind of disastrous event. And some examples of these disastrous events could include natural disasters like fires and floods, as well as natural climate change. But unfortunately now humans, and this is directly now leading into our next topic, we're in the last few slides of Unit 4, and which is leading into Unit 5, which is ecology. And in ecology, we're going to talk about how humans are impacting ecosystems and affecting gene pools. So if humans go in and destroy a forest, that can create a bottleneck effect. Or if we dump a bunch of pollution, that can create a bottleneck effect. And so now humans are functioning in some ways as a form of a natural disaster. And then when we get into global warming, that goes over here into massive climate changes that can become really problematic for organisms. So the reason why it's called a bottleneck effect is because here the different marbles in the bottle represent different colors, let's say, of butterflies. And if we turn a bottle over, usually I ask, okay, what's going to happen when the bottle turns over? And usually somebody gets it, that most of the marbles are going to get stuck. And that's why it's called the bottleneck effect, is they get stuck, and everything that's left in this bottle did not survive. These are the survivors. So over here we see basically a higher frequency of yellow butterflies, let's say. But after this bottleneck effect, so let's say that was a forest fire, or maybe humans went in and chopped the forest down or something, we now have a much higher frequency of blue. Like it's 80% blue or whatever, where here it's clearly not originally 80%. So it's possible that if the blue is just like a really horrible camouflage, let's say, or whatever alleles survive through this bottleneck effect are not beneficial, there can be really negative effects for the species. But in this case, it's implying that they recovered, and now we see a higher frequency of blue, and there are still some yellows in there, but the species was able to carry on. And we can kind of apply this to what happened to dinosaurs in a way, except that we wouldn't just look at one species. We would look at like all the dinosaurs, or basically all the reptiles on Earth at the time of the dinosaur extinction. So as I've talked about before, we think an asteroid or a comet hit the Earth, blasting all this stuff into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun. The Earth cooled over a huge period of time, and the dinosaurs could not get enough food and could not survive in these colder climates, and they died off. And that could be represented by this. So this inside the bottle would be all the large reptiles that did not survive. But smaller reptiles did survive. They didn't eat as much food. They could keep their body temperature a little bit more effectively in this colder climate, could go underground maybe to help with their body temperature, which the larger dinosaurs could not. And so inside our little jar here would represent the smaller reptiles that did survive this extinction event, and this would be all the dinosaurs. And then eventually the reptiles, carried on and evolved into all the new modern reptiles that exist today. All right, there are two potential outcomes of the bottleneck effect. So one is that the population recovers, and that's only if the new gene pool has fitness. So if it doesn't have fitness, then something else is going to happen. So we see here the red line represents the bottleneck event, and here's the drastic decline in population. And if the population still has fitness for survival in this niche, they can recover. But if the species does not have fitness, anymore, it can go extinct. And this again ties directly into how humans are impacting an ecosystem, because the main reason why animals are endangered or going extinct right now because of humans is because of destroying their habitat. So if we destroy their habitat, their forest, for instance, and there's this big population decrease of as animals die, if the habitat cannot provide for this species, they will go extinct. And this is why, unfortunately, it is believed that humans are causing the newest mass extinction. And extra, unfortunately, is that we know we're doing it, and we're not doing enough to stop this process, as corporations and governments are continuing to destroy and pollute habitats, or species are being hunted to extinction, like rhinos and tigers. And they're not able to survive and carry on, which is a big part of some of what we're going to talk about in Unit 5 coming up in the next week or so. So this is why we need to protect habitats, because if we don't protect habitats, there's going to be bottleneck events happening all over the world, and extinction is just going to continue to happen for many popular and beautiful species all over the earth. So in order to help them recover, we need to start protecting habitats, regrowing forests, replanting trees, reducing pollution, no longer hunting them to extinction, and things like that. All right, the other type of genetic drift is called the founder effect. And this is a change in allele frequencies as a result of the migration of a small subgroup of a population. And this ties back to a topic from our first week of Unit 4, which is geographic isolation. So, for instance, let's say a storm blows some birds, or in this case they're looking at some insects, out over the ocean, and they land on an island, and they become a new population of insects on this island, and that is called the founder effect. They are now the founders of a new population. Now, when we look at their alleles, we see that this sort of color combination represents what were rare genes, but in their previous population, on wherever they got blown from. And then what we see now, though, is that 3 out of 5, or 60%, now have this rare gene. So now what used to be rare is now somewhat common. So that's a big change in their allele frequencies. What was rare is now more frequent. And over time, what might happen is, let's say that allele is a big benefit for survival on this beach. Maybe it's better camouflage, or a better way of dealing with living on a beach. And now we see that over time, natural selection has caused what was a rare allele to become totally common, to 100%. And then over time, what we might see is they're going to continue to evolve more. Here we see a new allele has shown up. Their color and their camouflage has changed a little bit, and now they're becoming a new species, and the allele frequencies have changed even more, and we have totally new alleles. So again, if we have a bunch of different species, or same species with different alleles, some that make brown. Looks like this one is representing incomplete dominance because they're blending. So if you're double capital, you're brown. If you're double lowercase and totally recessive, you're white. And then if you're heterozygous and have one of each letter, you end up with a blending of the two. We talked about this in genetics. This is called incomplete dominance. So there's 3 genotypes, the orange, brown, and white for this species of butterfly. And something happens and causes some of them to go over this other island, and there's no white ones on this island. There's just the other colors. If that doesn't work for that island, they might all die and it won't make a difference. But over time, if they're able to survive, they're going to maybe colonize it, and we would see very different frequencies, because over here, 5 out of, 14, 15, at least, 35%, let's say, are white. Now 0% are white, and the frequencies have really changed as they've moved into this new island. And that's it for our evolution notes. So here we have just an interesting picture of a bunch of different dinosaurs and their skeletons, including some of these huge ones and all sorts of other interesting dinosaurs in this picture.